We're jumping into the truly tumultuous 6th and 7th centuries of the Frankish kingdom. It's a period that history often reduces to just this spectacular, really blood-soaked personal drama, and then this slow, stealthy political maneuver that fundamentally changed who was actually holding the reins of power.
It is the ultimate historical irony, isn't it? The Merovingian kingdom, just recently unified, and then it instantly shatters.
Instantly.
And that just paves the way for a century of instability where political survival required, immense cunning and just ruthless ambition.
Right.
And the chaos at the top, all the family feuds, the assassinations, that created the vacuum that allowed the officials in the basement, the bureaucracy, to inherit the crown without ever really fighting a major battle for it.
And that's our mission for this podcast. You've supplied us with some really gripping material on this Merovingian era, and we are going to try to cut through that long list of names. We want to find the crucial political shifts and some of the unbelievable anecdotes that explain precisely how the real power slipped away from the kings and into the hands of their chief administrators.
Let's do it.
So let's start with that brief moment of what you could call illusory unity. We can begin in 558 CE.
Right.
The Frankish kingdom, founded by Clovis over half a century earlier, was finally under the rule of a single man again, Chlothar I.
The last surviving son of Clovis, a man who had, navigated and survived decades of just brutal competition among his own siblings to get what his father had always wanted.
A unified realm.
A unified realm. And this unification, as we know, was tragically short-lived. It only lasted 3 years.
Only 3 years after all that work.
All that work. Chlothar dies suddenly in 561 from a high fever while he's on a hunting expedition. And just like that, a half-century reign comes to an abrupt end, and the kingdom immediately goes back to that unstable, decentralized state that had plagued the Franks since Clovis's death.
What's truly astonishing here, though, is Clothar's decision upon his death. He himself had witnessed and, participated in all the fratricidal warfare that characterized the Frankish state.
He knew exactly what it was like.
He knew the misery, the instability that came with division, and yet he chose to divide the crown among all 4 of his surviving sons. Why would a man who fought so hard for unity deliberately perpetuate that chaos?
Well, it really speaks to a deeply ingrained, fundamental difference between the Frankish understanding of kingship and, say, the later medieval concept of monarchy.
Okay.
The concept of primogeniture, where the oldest son just inherits everything, it didn't exist here.
Right.
For the Franks, the kingship was viewed less like a perpetual office and more like a warrior chiefdom. The king had to earn his crown.
He had to prove his worth.
He had to prove his worth through strength, military prowess, and competition.
So Chlothar was basically sticking to an ancient tribal ideal, even though he had to know it would guarantee immediate political collapse.
Precisely. His own struggle against his brothers wasn't seen as a political failure. It was seen as proof of his fitness to rule.
Right.
So by dividing the crown among his 4 sons, Sigebert, Cheribert, Chilperic, and Guntram, he was forcing them into the exact same competition he had endured. They weren't seen as joint rulers collaborating for the state. They were instantly hostile kings of separate competing states.
Ensuring the instability just kept going generation after generation.
Exactly.
And that 4-way split, it pretty quickly consolidates into something a little more manageable, but also far more dangerous after only a few years.
That's right. By 567, Cheribert, the second oldest brother, he dies suddenly. No heir.
Yep.
So the remaining 3, Sigebert, Chilperic, and Guntram, they immediately seize his land and just partition it among themselves. And this territorial division is crucial because it crystallizes the 3 geographical realms that would dictate Frankish politics, warfare, and, well, everything for the next 100 years.
We absolutely need to understand this geography because these regions, they develop these really distinct political cultures that shape the rise of the mayors later on.
Let's break them down. So first you have Austrasia in the north and east. It's the East Land, and it's ruled by Sigebert.
Right.
This was the most martial, the most traditional Frankish area. It bordered hostile territories like the Avars.
So it's a frontier state, basically.
It's a frontier state. And Sigebert moves the capital from the traditional city of Reims to Metz. And this wasn't just a preference, it was a strategic move. He had to fortify the eastern frontier and centralize military resources against all these external threats. This region maintained a very strong tradition of powerful local nobles and a focus on military success.
Okay, so that's Austrasia. Then you have Neustria.
Neustria was ruled by Chilperic. This is the New West Land, holding the central and southern territories, including key strategic cities like Soissons and, of course, the administrative heart of Paris. Neustria tended to be more centralized, more Romanized, and more focused on the court and administration.
And finally, the third one, Burgundy.
Burgundy, ruled by Guntram. It was geographically and politically the minor of the three. It was often just caught in the middle.
Right.
Guntram's entire survival depended on his ability to perform these political gymnastics,
Yeah.
aligning himself temporarily with either Austrasia or Neustria just to maintain the balance of power.
That parity you mentioned between Neustria and Austrasia, that's the explosive ingredient right there. With these two great kingdoms nearly equal in strength, the competition between Chilperic and Sigebert for the status of High King,
The symbolic overlord of all Franks.
it becomes this unavoidable zero-sum game.
It guaranteed war. But, war wasn't the only way to gain an edge. When military parity exists, stability is threatened by this desperate race for advantage through other means, primarily wealth, diplomatic prestige, and, of course, strategic marriages.
And it was in this realm of international marriage politics that Sigebert, for a little while, gained a decisive and fateful lead.
Yes, the stage was set for this strategic marriage race, and Sigebert of Austrasia, he made the first highly impressive move. He reached far beyond the Frankish territories, securing an alliance with the most powerful kingdom in Western Europe outside of Francia.
He marries Brunhilda, the Visigothic princess. Now, this wasn't just any marriage. Brunhilda was the daughter of King Athanagild of Hispania. What did this marriage immediately signal to the other Frankish courts?
Oh, it was a tremendous boost in international prestige. The Visigoths controlled a vast, relatively stable, and wealthy kingdom in modern Spain. So by marrying Brunhilda, Sigebert gained a massive diplomatic alliance, a significant influx of cash in the form of a dowry.
Right, the dowry is key.
It's always key. And he got a queen who was known to be highly educated and politically astute. He instantly projected the image of a sovereign, capable of operating on a continental scale, not just a regional warlord.
So Sigebert had won the opening round of the power race. The research indicates that Chilperic of Neustria realized immediately that he was now politically inferior to his brother.
Oh, absolutely.
He needed to catch up instantly, no matter the cost.
And his response was cynical, fast, and ultimately catastrophic. Chilperic already had a primary wife, Otavera, and several concubines, but prestige demanded a royal alliance.
Of course.
So seeing Sigbert's success, he immediately sought the hand of Brunhilda's sister, Galswintha. This was a direct attempt to neutralize Sigbert's diplomatic advantage and get access to that immense Visigothic wealth.
But to seal this monumental deal, Chilperic had to make a huge public promise to Galswintha's father, Athanagild.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Chilperic promised he would put away all his previous wives and concubines and honored Galswintha as his only queen. And for Athanagild, this was the condition of the dowry.
A guarantee.
A guarantee that his daughter would be the sole legitimate queen in Neustria. And Chilperic, to his credit, honored this promise initially.
Gregory of Tours gives us a fantastic detail about Chilperic's motivations, doesn't he?
He does. Gregory, who is the crucial chronicler for this time, he notes the immediate respect and honor Chilperic showed Galswintha, but his analysis is, well, it's biting. He writes that Chilperic loved her very dearly, for she had brought a large dowry with her.
Classic. It's historical shade. Chilperic's affection was directly proportional to the size of the Visigothic gold reserves.
Exactly. But, as you pointed out, the promise was short-lived. Chilperic was still secretly devoted to one of his previous wives, Fredegund. She wasn't royalty, but she was a brilliant, ambitious commoner.
And Galswintha finds out.
She quickly discovers that Fredegund was still frequently visiting the royal bedchamber, and this created an immediate, impossible tension. Galswintha, a powerful princess from a wealthy kingdom, was not prepared to tolerate this slight.
Oh.
She complained bitterly and eventually made the fatal mistake of demanding to return home to Hispania.
And why was that demand so catastrophic for Chilperic?
It was about money and political standing. It was always about money. If Galswintha returned home, Chilperic would be forced to return that immense dowry. He had used that money and political capital to catch up to his brother Sigebert.
He couldn't afford to lose it.
Couldn't afford to lose it. But he also couldn't give up Fredegund. So he was trapped between immense wealth and political necessity on one side and obsessive emotional devotion on the other.
And the convenience of murder solved the problem.
It did. One morning, Galswintha was found strangled in her bed. The details are sparse, but the timeline is damning.
So it was an inside job.
The murder was widely suspected, or, let's be honest, known to have been orchestrated by Chilperic, or perhaps even executed by Fredegund herself. It was an internal court conspiracy.
The political class was stunned, but what was the immediate consequence for Chilperic and Fredegund? Did the Visigoths demand justice?
Officially, nothing happened to them. Nothing. Chilperic immediately reinstated Fredegund as his queen. And this move was a blatant insult, not just to the Visigoths, but to the entire Frankish nobility. Many of them saw Chilperic as violating the laws of hospitality and honor. The court poet, Venantius Fortunatus, had to walk this diplomatic razor's edge in his funeral lament, describing her being snatched away by death, completely ignoring the obvious violence of it all.
So Chilperic and Fredegund escape punishment, but they create a monster.
They create the engine of the civil war. Brunhilda, now the Queen of Austrasia, never forgave the murder of her sister. And this wasn't just a squabble over territory anymore.
No, this was personal.
It was a deeply personal, blood-soaked feud over family honor, political legitimacy, and a colossal dowry. This single event, Galswintha's murder, transformed the geopolitical rivalry between Austrasia and Neustria into a decades-long politically motivated civil war, driven by the intense hatred between two exceptionally powerful women. The stage was set for political destruction.
Once the murder was public and Fredegund was queen, the rivalry just exploded. This deeply personal hatred between Brunhilda and Fredegund fueled 7 years of constant warfare between Sigebert's Austrasia and Chilperic's Neustria.
And history tells us it was largely inconclusive. Warfare was constant, but neither side could land a decisive blow because the power balance was so even.
Right.
And this constant fighting, it actually elevated the status of the third brother, Guntram of Burgundy.
Guntram was essentially the perennial swing vote, wasn't he?
Absolutely. He ruled the smallest kingdom, but his survival depended on his cunning ability to maintain an equal distance between the two heavyweights. He survived by constantly shifting allegiance to whoever seemed less likely to assassinate him the following week. He was always operating in the shadows, just waiting for exhaustion to set in.
But the war escalated dramatically in 575. Brunhilda's husband, Sigebert, became the first Frankish king to be directly taken out by this feud.
Yes. Fredegund decided that constant war was just too slow. Her ambition was limitless. She didn't want merely to displace Brunhilda's sister. She wanted to destroy Brunhilda's entire political foundation.
So she turns to assassination.
She sends 2 assassins to kill Sigebert. And the research gives us an incredible insight into the treachery involved in Merovingian court politics through the method they used to get in.
How did they manage to get close to the king?
They posed as defectors from Chilperic's court. They claimed they were so disgusted by Chilperic's treachery that they wished to change allegiance and recognize Sigebert as the High King.
And he believed them.
Sigebert, believing he had won a political victory, granted them access.
And here's where the specific details bring this event to chilling life. They didn't use military swords or spears. They attacked Sigebert with poisoned skirmish axes.
That is a detail that speaks volumes about the nature of the attack. The skirmish axe was a long, single-edged Scandinavian knife. It was primarily an eating utensil, a utility knife, or a tool something you associate with domestic life, not open warfare. Yeah. Using a poisoned tool associated with the dinner table, rather than a military weapon, it just underscored the calculated treachery and the sheer intimacy of the assassination. Sigebert died in agony as the poison took effect.
Sigebert's death instantly shifted the power structure, but not in the way Fredegund might have hoped.
No.
His death left a 5-year-old son, Childebert II, as the heir, which put Brunhilda directly in power as regent, and she was now nursing a double dose of personal hatred for her sister and for her husband.
And Brunhilda responded to this disaster with a moment of brilliant long-term political strategy. She was ruthless, but she was a gifted administrator. Her first goal was securing her son's future and gaining leverage over the politically malleable Guntram of Burgundy.
And she accomplished this by convincing the childless Guntram to adopt Childebert.
Exactly. This secured her position and gave her a massive political advantage. If Guntram died, her son would inherit Burgundy, combining 2 of the 3 Frankish realms.
So she turned a devastating loss
into a massive long-term political gain for her dynasty. It bypassed the immediate fragmentation that usually followed a king's death.
Brunhilda's competence as a ruler is frequently noted. She supervised the administration of Austrasia with an iron fist, but the irony is that her very competence became her political liability.
This is a critical point for understanding the later rise of the mayors. Brunhilda was a thoroughly competent ruler. She focused on centralizing administration, maintaining roads, ensuring the crown held power.
Things you'd think people would want.
You would think. But she was a Visigothic outsider, and her strong personality and efficient administration deeply annoyed the Frankish nobles who valued their own local power and autonomy. They didn't want an effective, centralized queen. The hostility was so pervasive that it echoes for centuries.
It even gets codified in mythology, doesn't it?
Yes. The later Germanic epics, like the Song of the Nibelungs, they immortalize her. She is transformed into this semi-mythical figure, often depicted as a thing of terror. And this mythological transformation is a direct reflection of the deep-seated political resentment the Frankish nobility held for her as an effective, foreign-born ruler.
So while Brunhilda was consolidating her power, Fredegund was also dealing with immediate personal catastrophe. Her husband, Chilperic, was murdered in 584 by a man with a personal grudge.
Leaving her without a male heir to Neustria.
Right. And her immediate response was a masterpiece of political deception.
Chilperic's death was a moment of acute vulnerability for Fredegund. She needed an heir immediately to justify her continued regency, so she announced that she was pregnant.
A claim met with, let's say, enormous public skepticism.
Enormous skepticism. Even Guntram, the usually neutral brother, publicly suggested the child's true father might be a Frankish courtier, not his dead brother.
The entire legitimacy of Neustria's government hinged on the paternity of that unborn child. How did she silence the public doubt?
By wielding the power of the church and the nobility against itself. Once the baby was born, Fredegund organized this massive, highly visible political ritual. She assembled 3 bishops and 300 of the most important Frankish leaders, the Optimates.
300.
300. And she made them all swear a binding oath on holy relics that the newborn child, Chlothar II, was indeed Chilperic's son.
That's a staggering display of manufactured consensus. Why was the oath of the bishops and 300 leaders sufficient to overcome such widely held public doubt?
Because in this era, an oath sworn on holy objects in front of high-ranking church officials was functionally untouchable. It transformed a biological question into a religious and political certainty. Guntram, who had the most to gain from challenging the paternity, was forced to back off.
He had no choice.
He had no choice. He respected the sanctity of the oath, knowing that challenging it would mean open conflict with the entire Neustrian religious and military elite.
So Guntram attended the baptism. Fredegund secured her regency, and she named the boy Chlothar II after his powerful, if putative, grandfather. This just solidified the political supremacy of both matriarchs, even as the political system itself was melting down.
By 592, the personal vendetta had fully nationalized. It became the central dynamic of the Frankish state. And when Guntram of Burgundy died childless that year, Childebert II, Brunhilda's son, inherited the realm just as she had shrewdly planned.
So Brunhilda was now helping her son rule Austrasia and Burgundy, 2/3 of the Frankish lands, while Fredegund ruled Neustria for her young son, Chlothar II.
The entire Frankish rule was dominated by 2 women, both regents, who harbored this deep, undying personal hatred for each other.
This is just unprecedented political control by women in this era.
It absolutely is. And their relationship ensured that the violence continued unabated. This situation was an unsustainable strain on the Frankish political economy, but it also masked the quiet transfer of power that was happening just below the royal level.
And the cycle of violence continued when Brunhilda's son, Childebert, died suddenly in 595, still in his mid-20s.
And Brunhilda immediately accused Fredegund of poisoning him, even from a distance.
Whether it was true or not, it was convenient.
The accusation, whether true or merely convenient, instantly returned Brunhilda to full, undisputed power. She became regent again for his 2 young sons, who then divided Austrasia and Burgundy between them. She was proving politically indomitable.
The destructive full-scale war between the queens was averted only when Fredegund died the following year in 596. This left her son, Chlothar, to rule Neustria alone, but Brunhilda's political career was far from over.
Far from it. In fact, she entered her most controversial and tenacious phase. Her political tenacity was legendary. Even with her mortal enemy gone, Brunhilda had created so much resentment among her own nobility that she couldn't maintain control easily.
Right.
So in Austrasia, her older grandson, Theudebert II, he reached his majority at the relatively young age of 13 in 599 and immediately
Kicked her out.
with the strong backing of the Austrasian nobles, he expelled his grandmother.
That expulsion speaks volumes about the local Frankish resentment for her centralized, foreign style of rule. The woman who had ruled 2/3 of Francia was suddenly an outcast.
Fredegar's account of this is rather sad. He writes that she was wandering alone, lost on her journey south after being expelled, until a poor man eventually took her to her younger grandson, Theuderic II of Burgundy.
And he welcomed her.
Theuderic, out of familial loyalty, welcomed her. This was arguably the most critical error he ever made.
Why was welcoming her such a catastrophic political miscalculation?
Because Brunhilda, once welcomed, attached herself to the throne's power like a limpet, as the chronicles describe.
Wow.
She immediately began to exert absolute control over the young king, refusing to give up her status as the primary power broker. By the time Theuderic was 20, he was still single, still under his grandmother's thumb, and crucially, unable to rule Burgundy on his own behalf.
This sounds like a calculated move to prevent her own political displacement.
It was entirely calculated. She successfully prevented him from marrying or taking a legitimate wife, ensuring that no legitimate queen could ever displace her position as the chief advisor and de facto ruler of the court. Her power was completely dependent on the weakness and dependence of her grandson.
This brings us to 607, the famous sabotaged alliance, where Theuderic attempts to break free of her control.
He was desperate. Theuderic sought to establish a major political counterbalance to his overbearing grandmother by seeking an alliance with the powerful Visigothic kingdom, the same kingdom his aunt and Brunhilda had come from.
Full circle.
He sent for King Videric's daughter, Ermenberga. A Burgundian Visigothic alliance would have instantly made Theuderic the most powerful Frankish king and given him the diplomatic weight to sideline Brunhilda.
But she intervened again, sacrificing a critical alliance for personal power.
The research indicates that Brunhilda poisoned him against his bride with her words. She used her cunning and manipulative resources, whispering doubts and complaints about the Visigothic princess, fearing that a true queen would end her political career.
And it worked.
Her campaign worked. Theuderic lost his enthusiasm, never consummated the marriage, and sent Ermenberga back to Hispania a year later, destroying the alliance and insulting the Visigothic king Witteric in the process. Brunhilda had successfully protected her position at the cost of the Frankish state's international stability.
Her final years were characterized by this savage, unrelenting need for revenge against those who had slighted her. In 612, Theuderic allied with his cousin, Chlothar II of Neustria, against his own brother, Theudebert of Austrasia.
The same brother who had expelled Brunhilda years prior.
Exactly.
This internal war led to a horrifying scene recorded in history, the Battle of the Forest of Ardennes. The fighting was so brutal and the casualties so immense that the chronicler Fredegund recorded that in the fighting line there was no room for the slain to fall down.
Meaning the slain stood upright in their ranks.
Corpse supporting corpse. It is a powerful, almost surreal image of utter slaughter, demonstrating the self-destructive nature of the Merovingian family feud.
And the political outcome was purely driven by Brunhilda's need for final revenge.
She had not forgotten Theudebert's expulsion. Upon his capture, she ordered Theuderic to imprison and murder his brother. And determined to extinguish that line entirely, a soldier brutally murdered Theudebert's young son by dashing out his brains on a stone.
This level of institutionalized cruelty, driven by a personal matriarchal feud, had just become the norm in the Frankish kingdoms.
Yet, this moment of absolute triumph for Brunhilda was instantly undercut by fate.
Right.
Less than a year later, Theuderic, having claimed Austrasia, died suddenly of dysentery. He was still without a legitimate heir. Brunhilda, now in her 70s, attempted to seize control yet again, this time for his illegitimate sons. But she had alienated everyone, the nobles, the church, and most importantly, the powerful court administrators.
And this is the moment where the power vacuum created by decades of royal chaos is finally filled by the bureaucracy.
Absolutely. The nobles of Austrasia, led by the chief court official, the mayor of the palace, had had enough of Brunhilda's foreign-backed centralizing tyranny. So to prevent her from regaining power, the mayors of the palace from Austrasia, a man named Warnakar, and Burgundy, a man named Rado, invited Chlothar II of Neustria to invade.
A stunning move. They invited their enemy in.
They calculated that Chlothar, though technically a foe, was the lesser of two evils compared to Brunhilda.
Chlothar accepted the invitation and captured his aunt Brunhilda in 613. And her execution was arguably the most spectacular and infamous act of political violence in early medieval history.
Chlothar, now holding the crown of all the Franks, was boiling with fury against her. He held her responsible not only for the death of his putative father, but for the decades of civil war and destabilization that had racked the kingdom. She was subjected to 3 days of diverse, agonizing tortures.
The final details provided are particularly gruesome and, designed to erase her historical dignity.
In a horrific public spectacle, she was first led through the ranks of the army on a camel, a symbol of degradation, before finally being tied by her hair, one arm, and one leg to the tail of an unbroken wild horse. She was then dragged and cut to shreds by its hoofs.
It was a deliberate public obliteration of a woman who had, through sheer personal will, ruled Frankish politics for half a century. Her end marked not just the end of a rival, but the end of an era of highly centralized Merovingian female power. With Brunhilda finally removed in 613, Chlothar II ruled the entire Frankish realm. And the dramatic irony is profound. The man whose paternity was most publicly questioned became the last surviving king of the original royal line.
It is the ultimate paradox of survival, isn't it? Clothar's immediate challenge was not winning battles, but consolidating control and bringing order to a landscape just shredded by constant, exhausting warfare. He had inherited a kingdom that was united in name, but structurally decentralized and exhausted.
And his solution was the Edict of Paris in 615.
Which is the structural pivot point in this entire story.
Before we dive into the edict itself, we need to clarify a crucial term that has been looming in the background: the mayor of the palace, or the mayor domus. Who were these figures, and why did they suddenly hold the decisive power?
The mayor of the palace, literally the head of the house, began as a purely administrative functionary. Think of him as the chief steward of the king's royal estates and household.
So, like a chief of staff.
Exactly. He managed the treasury, supervised the logistics of the court, acted as the king's chief of staff, and ensured the loyalty of the other palace officials. Because the Merovingian kings traveled constantly and ruled through their personal presence, the mayor controlled the material reality of the kingdom: the money, the land, and the food supply.
So, while the king was focused on fighting his brothers or managing a feud, the mayor was accumulating material resources and organizational loyalty.
Exactly. Power flows to the person who manages the money and the logistics. By the 7th century, the mayors had evolved from household managers into the chief spokesman for the regional nobility, often leading the local armies and overseeing legislation on the king's behalf.
Now, back to the Edict of Paris in 615. On the surface, it looks like a peace treaty issued by the new king, Chlothar. But what was its crucial structural provision?
The edict was essentially a constitutional settlement forced upon the new king by the nobility, and more specifically, by the powerful mayors who helped him overthrow Brunhilda. The key provision was that the king would not overrule the authority of the local palaces, Austrasia, Neustria, and Burgundy.
So the kingdoms remained united under Chlothar.
But without a centralized government.
This was the price of admission for Chlothar, wasn't it?
It was the devil's bargain. Warnakar and Rado, the mayors who engineered Brunhilda's downfall, demanded protection for their own authority. They wanted autonomy from the central crown. The edict essentially recognized and legalized the regional independence of the 3 Frankish realms, ensuring that Chlothar could not impose Neustrian centralization on Austrasia or Burgundy. He had the crown, but the executive levers remained local.
And the mayors immediately pushed for even greater institutional authority in the years following the edict. This brings us to 617, the formal legal codification of their permanent power.
That's when Chlothar made the second critical concession. He agreed to make the mayor of the palace a lifetime appointment. This was a constitutional transformation that you really cannot overstate. Before this, the king could, in theory, fire his chief administrator. Now, the mayors were legally immovable. They have authority for life.
So Chlothar stabilized the kingdom in the short term by conceding authority, but in the long term he signed away the crown's political relevance by making the chief bureaucrat permanent.
The effect was profound. A lifetime appointment meant the mayor could plan long-term, build alliances, legislate for his realm, administer the vast royal estates independently, and most importantly, raise and command armies without fear of royal dismissal. The Merovingian king retained the symbolic head of state title, but the executive power, the real capacity to govern, now legally belonged to a bureaucracy he could not terminate.
The era of the do-nothing kings was born structurally right there in 617.
It was.
Despite this consolidation of mayoral power, the regional fragmentation didn't end. The nobles of Austrasia, the traditional Eastland, continued to agitate strongly for more independence from Neustria, where Chlothar was based.
The regional identity was simply too strong. The Austrasians saw themselves as the military backbone of the Franks and resented being ruled from Neustria. So Chlothar compromised again, trying to appease them by making his 20-year-old son, Dagobert, the king of Austrasia.
This provided Austrasia with its desired separation, a separate king for their region. But the independence of Dagobert's rule was entirely illusory, wasn't it?
It was pure political theater. Dagobert was under his father's control, and even more importantly, the real authority in the Austrasian court was not the young king, but but his mayor of the Callus, a man whose family we will soon know very well, Pippin the Elder. The Merovingian crown was physically present in Austrasia, but the levers of governance were firmly held by the mayors, who were preparing to make the final, most audacious grab for power.
When Chlothar II died in 629, Dagobert got a brief chance to break the mold. He managed to achieve the final, short-lived unification of the entire Frankish realm.
And his methods were classic Merovingian, decisiveness backed by ruthless violence. He unified the realm by coercing his half-brother Sherbert to retreat, and then supervising his swift assassination to claim the entirety of the kingdom for himself.
Dagobert was, for a time, a dynamic and effective ruler, perhaps the last of the powerful Merovingian kings.
He was. But this brief unification immediately triggered the same regional resentment that had haunted his father. The Austrasian nobles immediately objected to centralization under Dagobert. They had tasted independence, and they were not going back to being ruled from Neustria.
So Dagobert was forced into a political relapse to keep the peace, immediately ceding ground and reinforcing the very structure that would eventually doom his family.
He was forced to appease the powerful Austrasians by making his own son, Sigebert III, king of Austrasia. Sigebert was only 3 years old at the time.
A toddler.
A toddler. This act not only reinforced the regional separation, but, more critically, solidified the authority of the mayor of the palace, Pippin the Elder, who, again, would rule on behalf of the child king. The king was a toddler. The mayor was the government.
Dagobert died in 639, leaving Sigebert in Austrasia and Clovis II ruling Neustria and Burgundy. At this point, the question of which royal son sat on the throne was almost entirely irrelevant. The real question was the concentration of power among the mayors.
And this is where the mayors stop acting merely as regional administrators and start consolidating power on a national scale. By 643, Pippin the Elder, the powerful Austrasian mayor, had somehow engineered his way into seizing the mayoralities of both Neustria and Burgundy.
So the executive power for the entire Frankish kingdom, all three realms, was placed in the hands of one appointed official. This must have created incredible tensions.
It was an unprecedented concentration of power. The mayors, who were initially designed to manage the household and represent local interests against the central crown, were now functioning as a unified, centralized, non-royal national government.
And here we reach the single most important constitutional change in the political life of the Franks, the hereditary shift of the mayoral office.
This is the political coup accomplished through bureaucratic means. Pippin the Elder passed this unprecedented combined executive power to his son, Grimoald. The mayoral office, which had always been appointed by the king, even if for life, was now adopting the royal custom of blood succession.
But the job became hereditary.
The function of rule became hereditary before the king's official title did. The title of king still belonged to the Merovingians, but the actual material power was being inherited by the family of Pippin.
This gave Grimoald the confidence to mount a direct, overt attack on the crown itself.
Grimoald began by attempting a political takeover. He convinced the young King Sigurd of Austrasia, who was pious and perhaps politically naive, to adopt Grimoald's own son as heir. This was an overt, undeniable move to usurp the throne and transition power peacefully. The plan was momentarily foiled when Sigebert unexpectedly fathered his own legitimate son, Dagobert II.
But when Sigebert died young, Grimoald refused to admit defeat and mounted his physical coup in 656.
This action perfectly illustrates where the true power now lay. Grimoald didn't need to assassinate the king. She simply needed to neutralize the heir. He ordered the 6-year-old rightful heir, Dagobert, to be tonsured.
Which means shaving the top of his head.
Right. And we mentioned this was a simple act with profound political weight. The tonsure was a sacred form of political mutilation. It dedicated the individual to the service of God, rendering him physically and spiritually unfit for secular rule. Kings were chosen by God, but they ruled in the temporal world. A tonsured man was dedicated to the monastery, removed from the line of succession.
So he neutralized the heir without spilling royal blood.
Exactly. He respected the sanctity of the royal line while simultaneously destroying its political utility. And having done that, Grimoald simply crowned his own son, Childebert the Adopted, as king of Austrasia.
The Merovingian dynasty was nearly over, replaced by the bureaucrat's family.
The coup succeeded temporarily, but the reaction came swiftly from the remaining royal house in Neustria. Clovis II of Neustria, Burgundy, determined to prevent the complete usurpation of the Merovingian title, authorized an invasion. Grimoald and his adopted son were captured and put to death. The mayors had overreached. for a moment.
But even though the coup failed, the damage to the Austrasian royal line was done, and the institutional shift was permanent.
Exactly. When the Austrasian throne was left empty, Clovis of Neustria did not bother to restore his nephew, the tonsured Dagobert, who was languishing in a monastery in England. Why? Because the concept of an independent Austrasian king was already redundant. Instead, Clovis allowed his own official, Erchinoald, to declare Clovis king of the entire realm, and Erchinoald became the mayor of the palace for all three palaces simultaneously.
The ultimate irony. The mayors, who were initially designed to preserve local authority against the crown, were now consolidating power on a national scale, making the Frankish kingdom centralized, but centralized under their authority, not the king's.
The final shift was complete. Clovis died shortly thereafter, leaving three small sons. For the next these young kings did almost nothing. They sat on their thrones, their power having evaporated into the complex administrative network managed by the mayors. Later chroniclers eventually dubbed these last generations of Merovingian rule the Roi Fénons, the do-nothing kings, confirming that the quiet structural transformation of the mayors into the true rulers was a done deal. The power had slipped away from the royal bedchamber and into the bureaucratic office, disguised initially by the spectacular violence and chaos of the warring queens.
It raises a profound question for you to consider. The rivalry between Brunhilda and Fredegund, while spectacularly bloody and personally destructive, was essentially a proxy conflict between the two most powerful Frankish regions. But in the vacuum of their exhaustion and the ensuing chaos, the bureaucracy, the mayors of the palace who simply managed the estates and the army, were quietly able to codify their temporary administrative authority into permanent hereditary control. It raises the question of whether personal vendettas that drain resources or quiet constitutional structural shifts are the true drivers of historical change. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there were a lot more episodes on this subject available right now. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs.